Welcome back to Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. I am Jack Llewellyn. I'm very happy to be back with all of you. I've been away for a few weeks. Lots of stuff that you don't necessarily care about. For the people who missed the podcast, thank you. For those who didn't know we were gone, I get it. But very happy to be back, and we're going to be back on schedule here starting this week. This week, we're going to go back to the last episode we did before I took my little hiatus, and we're going to talk in a slightly different way about the Los Mayos, Los Chapitos, CJNG situation, and we're going to look at it in a couple of different perspectives. But before that, there are two news items from my hiatus that I'd like to talk about. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, I have a very bad cold. The current test says not COVID, which is good. So please forgive my voice, but we'll get through this. So the first news item I wanted to talk about is something that came out about June 11th in the El Mayo case. And in that case, the prosecution informed the court that the government and the defense have, quote, discussed the potential for a resolution short of trial, which has occurred during the pendency of the capital case process. And thus, the government asked that the next hearing be postponed by 60 days. It was supposed to occur in July. It now presumably will be sometime in September. Immediate reaction to that is, okay, they're talking settlement. What's El Mayo going to give up? What's he likely to get? None of this should come as any big surprise to people for all the reasons we've talked about. You could assume there was going to be some type of plea bargaining. What I'm really interested in seeing is what El Mayo has to offer. And that's not to say that he clearly doesn't have lots of information about lots of things over a long period of time. And we may never, people outside the process may never know the answer to this. But what types of information, what specific information is the government looking to El Mayo for in exchange for, at a minimum, taking capital punishment off the table and then a reduced sentence or a better sentence, so he's not sitting next to El Chapo down the road in Florence at Supermax. So let's keep looking out for that. And I may have some more information on that in the next week or two, fingers crossed. Excuse me. The other interesting thing that happened is the United States District Court ordered the release on a compassionate sentence reduction basis, but it ordered the release of Honduran trafficker Juan Ramon Mata-Ballesteros, who has spent, at this point, 36 years in prison. Judge John A. Kronstadt of the United States District Court for the Central District of California granted a motion from the defense saying that Mata should be resentenced to the time already served and released without further delay. The motion, or the order says the motion is granted. It is ordered that the defendant shall be resentenced to time served on all charges and released immediately. There are going to be some nuances to him actually getting out and things, but that's the order that's out there. One of the interesting things, this is a little nuance of the law that I found fascinating. Under current law, only inmates convicted of offenses committed on or after November 1, 1987 may petition the court for compassionate sentence reduction. Well, as we know, the conduct for which Mata was sentenced, not counting anything relating to the Camarena case. But remember, he had those two big drug trafficking cases against him, one in California, one in Arizona. That conduct occurred between 1981 and 1985. So in theory, Mata wouldn't be eligible for a compassionate release. The defense had argued, wait a second, this distinction makes absolutely no sense. You've got an arbitrary date of November 1 in 1987. If you did something bad on October 31, 1987, you're SOL, but if it's on November 1, 1987, you have a chance. And the judge agreed with that and said that such a legal classification unjustifiably discriminates against people in similar situations. There is a weak and insufficiently justified rationale for preventing old law inmates from immediately requesting compassionate release. We've talked a lot about Mata. It was interesting. I was interviewed by a very, very, very prestigious newspaper in the country for background to talk about Mata. And I think he's still a fascinating character. I said in that interview that I think that he is maybe one of the most important figures in the Mexican drug trafficking story that we know little about and talk about so little. In many ways, he deserves credit. And I'll note, the big air quotes, right? Credit. But he deserves credit for being that bridge between Colombia and Mexico and allowed the cartels in Colombia to really thrive during that time period. And it can also be argued that his being Mata's presence allowed Felix Gallardo to grow and develop in a way that he might not have been able to, but for that Colombian connection. So when you're looking at the history of drug trafficking in Mexico, I think this Honduran needs to be front and center. I've shared personal stories. I sat next to him a couple times in court in the 1990 Zuno trial. I had the opportunity to talk to him when he was in prison in Springfield, Missouri. Had about an hour conversation with him with my good friend Jesus Martinez doing the translation. He came across as in that call as a nice, respectful person, answered all of my questions. I'm not sure that he answered all of them in a way that I would think necessarily followed the truth, but that's maybe neither here nor there. But anyways, we'll keep an eye on it. And as soon as I have more information on exactly when and how Mata is or will be transferred back to Honduras, I will let you know about that. Okay, let's talk about CJNG, Los Chapitos, and the alliance that, some have said threatens to reshape the cartel system in Mexico. And I want to talk about this in a couple of different ways. First, I want to talk about some of the reports that have come out about how this all went down and what it really means. I also want to look at the National Drug Assessment from the Drug Enforcement Administration. And then remember I talked about that group, the ACLED, and they had a fact-based, a data-based analysis of what was going on with respect to cartels and the shifting alliances in the face of the El Mayo, Los Chapitos, civil war, as we've called it. And I think if you look at it in all these different ways, it's helpful because remember, the plural of anecdote isn't data. On the other hand, data has some unfortunate features when you're trying to understand things. You're always looking back, right? There's time lag in order to gather data, collate the data, and then properly analyze it. And so in that regard, anecdote, different ways of explaining things without data becomes very important. And I think it's important to use those together. So over the last month, there have been a number of videos, posts on social media, pictures, etc., that appear to show armed cells of CJNG and Los Chapitos operating together. There have been pictures of new badges which put them together, badges that have the CJNG brand but also have pizza figurations in them, and it appears that there is some alliance between CJNG and Los Chapitos, and it appears, though I'm more dubious on this part, but it appears that the objective is to take out what's left of El Mayo's faction, right? To put an end to La Mayiza. There are a number of reports on how this all came together. I'm going to give you some information from an InfoBay article. And I've cited InfoBay a lot. I'm not suggesting that it's the most reputable, but I think it's pretty darn good. And it usually seems to have some good inside information. So that's the one I'm going to go with as far as explaining this alliance. So here's what InfoBay had to say. It says the alliance between Los Chapitos and the four-letter cartel began to take shape at the end of 2024, but was consolidated in 2025 after the collapse of Ivan Archivado Guzman's security apparatus. Think about that. That's pretty quick, isn't it? Goes on to say, for years, both factions were bitter enemies in states such as Zacatecas, Sonora, and Baja California, but the intensification of the war against La Mayiza and the fall of their main security chiefs changed the panorama. According to a recent report by Oscar Balderas in Milenio, the capture of Jorge Humberto Figueroa Benitez, alias La Paris, in May 2025, sealed the alliance again. The CJNG, taking advantage of the internal crisis, offered one of the most reliable operators, Audius Flores Silva, also known as El Jardinero, as the new head of security for Los Chapitos. Now, I'll come back to this, but keep in mind, this is an area that some people have questioned what El Jardinero's role really is. Nevertheless, this is what's being reported, that one of the big offerings that CJNG could provide in the light of the dismantling of Ivan's security staff is to present somebody powerful, somebody well-known, somebody with gravitas to be that new person. Balderas says that in exchange, Los Chapitos agreed to share their routes for the transfer of drugs, weapons, and migrants, allowing the CJNG to expand its presence in the north of the country. In addition, they obtained armed support and access for safe havens. For their part, Jose Luis Montenegro, and illicit investigations have revealed that the initial contact occurred days before the capture of El Mayo and Joaquin Guzman Lopez, when Ivan anticipated an internal offensive and sought an agreement with El Mencho. The emissary was the aforementioned El Jardinero, who traveled to Guadalajara to negotiate with Abdiel Guzman Aranjo, a son of El Guano Guzman, one of the uncles of Los Chapitos and brother of El Chapo. During that meeting, Abdiel explained that La Mayiza had not only been strengthened by the rise of Mayito Flaco, but had also received support from other groups. According to the sources, the deciding point was personal. The murder of El Jardinero's brother, Jesus Miguel Flores Silva, in November 2022 in Mazatlan, attributed to men from La Mayiza. That death would have motivated Flores Silva to support the pact. Here it says the terms were clear. I'll put air quotes again around clear again, but here's what we think the terms are. CJNG would gain control of Nayarit, Zacatecas, and Chiapas. Los Chapitos would keep Sinaloa, Durango, and Sonora. Both groups would cooperate to recover strategic places in the United States, such as Chicago, New York, Phoenix, and Washington, traditionally dominated by the Zambatas. As a sign of confidence, Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar was temporarily transferred to a CJNG ranch in Jalisco. We talked about that in the past, the rumors of that. In exchange, Los Chapitos made it known that they had sensitive information about the location of Jessica Johanna Oscarera Gonzalez, the daughter of El Mencho, who is in the United States. All right. So that's the anecdotal story, right? That's what we think has happened, or what people seem to think has happened. And the exact parameters of it, of course, are going to be a little bit murky, but those are the basic details. Let's pull back from the anecdotal evidence and also talk about some of the data, because I think this is important. One of the things that came out that was most prominent in the DEA's drug enforcement threat assessment, or National Drug Threat Assessment, were the conversations or the discussions in the report about the development of CJNG. And I'm just going to read a little bit of what it says, some of which is obvious and everybody will agree with, some of which may come as a surprise, or at a minimum shows the changing nature of CJNG. So the National Drug Threat Assessment says CJNG is one of Mexico's most powerful, influential, and ruthless transnational criminal organizations, and is a key supplier of illicit fentanyl to the United States. CJNG has expanded its operations beyond Mexico's borders, establishing its presence in over 40 countries. The cartel uses its vast financial resources, unique franchise-based command structure, proclivity for violence, and access to corrupt officials to maintain and expand its influence over Mexico's illicit drug trade. According to Mexican news sources, CJNG could capitalize on the conflict between Los Mayos and Los Chapitos factions of the Sinaloa cartel, essentially by choosing sides in favor of their former rivals, Los Chapitos, against Los Mayos. A strategic alliance between CJNG and Los Chapitos has the potential to expand these groups' territories, resources, firepower, and access to corrupt officials, which could result in a significant disruption to the existing balance of power in Mexico and could serve to increase northbound drug flow and southbound weapons trafficking at the U.S.-Mexican border. It goes on to say, CJNG is one of the most significant threats to the public health, public safety, and national security of the United States. The cartel operates clandestine laboratories in Mexico where they manufacture illicit drugs and then utilize vast distribution networks to transport drugs into the United States. CJNG associates, facilitators, and affiliates operate in almost all 50 U.S. states. While other cartels approach money laundering in different ways, CJNG's financial arm, Los Zunis, feature prominently in the leadership structure of the cartel. Los Zunis lead the cartel's diverse network of money laundering operations and tactics to repatriate global illicit drug proceeds back to Mexico. This group and other CJNG factions use cryptocurrency exchanges, bulk cash smuggling, trade-based money laundering, and other methods for laundering illicit drug proceeds. CJNG is likely increasing its involvement in non-drug activities to include gasoline theft, extortion schemes, infiltrating legitimate industries, taxing human smuggling, and perpetrating real estate schemes, including timeshare fraud for money laundering purposes. CJNG members increasingly participate in these activities to diversify revenue streams and to protect drug trafficking assets from law enforcement seizures. Okay, so what's that? What is this saying? It's saying, number one, CJNG is getting bigger. Number two, it's saying, from the DEA's perspective, rather than sitting back and letting the two factions of CDS, Los Chapitos and Los Mayiza, rather than letting them just beat themselves to a pulp and then trying to take over whatever is left over, CJNG may, and apparently now has, decided to align with Los Chapitos to take out the Mayiza faction. Okay, one more piece of data that we need to look at. In the last episode, I talked about a group called the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data, ACLED. And it says that it is a disaggregated data collection, analysis, and crisis mapping initiative. ACLED collects information on the dates, actors, locations, fatalities, and types of all reported political violence and protest events around the world. The ACLED team conducts analysis to describe and explore conflict trends. Well, one of the things that they had done in a report that came out at the beginning of May, and I'll give credit to the main authors, Maria Fernanda Aroca and Sandra Pellegrini. They put together a report called How the Sinaloa Cartel Rift is Redrawing Mexico's Criminal Map. And part of what it was designed to do is to say, all right, let's forget the news reports. Let's forget the anecdotal evidence. Let's look at where violence is actually occurring. And are there ways that we can analyze that data where the violence actually was occurring to get some idea of what the path forward is going to be for these three groups, CJNG, La Mayiza, and Dos Chapitos. One of the interesting things, and I'd listened to a broadcast, they did a webinar on this in early May, and I was just absolutely fascinated, and I've read the report several times, but one of the areas that I thought was extremely interesting based on the data came under the report heading Rival Criminal Organizations Seek to Exploit the Sinaloa Cartel Rift. So that's an interesting, a provocative headline. First sentence is, the consequences of the Sinaloa Cartel's rift extend beyond internal dynamics as other criminal groups leverage the cartel's strained operational capacities to make territorial advances or forge new alliances. The authors then go on to look specifically at CJNG. And I want to read a couple more paragraphs from this. Since the Sinaloa cartel's fracture, ACLED data point to an intensification of the conflict between the Sinaloa cartels and the CJNG cartel in areas of illicit activities. A notable example is Tijuana, Baja California, where clashes between non-state armed groups and their targeting of civilians increased by 16% between July 24 and March 25 compared to the 8 months prior. The surge has particularly affected the city's northern districts along the U.S. border, where the Sinaloa cartel and other criminal groups, including the Tijuana cartel and CJNG, compete for control of cross-border trafficking areas in this critical corridor. Similar dynamics also play in Manzanillo, Colima, where the traffic between the CJNG and the Sinaloa cartel over the control of the port, a key hub for drug trafficking, has intensified. Meanwhile, in Nayarit, the El Mayo faction of the Sinaloa cartel and CJNG have both sought to secure the route connecting the state of Sinaloa with Zacatecas, a crucial link between the Pacific coast and the northern trafficking corridor. This escalation in violence is localized and highly strategic areas suggest a deliberate effort to concentrate their warring power and assert dominance in vital trafficking routes. Interestingly, though, the CJNG's behavior in other areas under dispute with the Sinaloa cartel is not uniquely offensive. In Chiapas, gang-related violence decreased 51% during that same 8-month period. This happened even though Chiapas has been the epicenter of a turf war between the two cartels over the control of migrant trafficking routes from Central America. While the decrease can be partly attributed to state-led efforts to curb insecurity and increase collaboration between state and military forces, the the CJNG may also have adopted strategic patience. It is either waiting for the Sinaloa cartel to weaken or is seeking an agreement with local power brokers to preserve its key operations without resorting to violence. Part of the reason for this may be that the U.S. designated the CJNG a foreign terrorist organization alongside the Sinaloa cartel and 4 other Mexican criminal groups, exposing the group to heightened security from the Mexican government. At the same time, though, it remains actively engaged in turf wars and clashes with security forces in the state of Michoacan, which provides an additional incentive for CJNG to maintain a low profile and concentrate its efforts on high priority fronts. Of course, CJNG isn't the only criminal group in Mexico looking to exploit the fragmentation of CDS. In Sonora, the cartel's factions face pressure from the Sonora Independent Cartel, an alliance formed in 2023 by three Sinaloa cartel offshoots to stop the cartel's expansion. Another group, La Linea, has taken advantage of the relocation of Sinaloa cartel's forces in Culiacan to intensify its incursion in Chihuahua. So, what does this tell you? What does this tell us? If you look at the anecdotal evidence, right? Here's what we think. We think that once Ivan got weakened sufficiently, there was an opportunity for an alliance between him and El Mencho that El Jardinero had a key role in, and that those two groups are now acting together in at least some areas, ostensibly against La Mayiza, but also together to assure that some of the northern trafficking routes that Los Chapitos had more control over are now available to CJNG. And if you look at the data seems to support the idea that El Mencho, rather than kind of rushing in to take advantage of the fractionalization of CDS, to take advantage of the civil war between La Mayiza and Los Chapitos, waited, took advantage in some places, and certainly was aggressive in places that CJNG could be, but didn't make an all-out effort to kind of, squash both at the same time. Instead, waited until the security apparatus of Los Chapitos, particularly with regard to Ivan, had been so dismantled, so impacted, that it was now a good opportunity to have an alliance with Los Chapitos. But you have to figure, don't you, that that CJNG is thinking they got the better end of the deal, that they extended the lifeline to Ivan, to Los Chapitos. I've asked this before, and obviously we don't have an answer right now, but I wonder what the key lieutenants in CJNG think of this alliance, and if they think it is a long-term plan to increase the scope, breadth, power of CJNG, or if it's a threat to their own little fiefdoms. Now, some of that may also be impacted by, as we've talked about before, the unique way in which CJNG handles the plazas and handles individual areas and things. But I think that's part of what we really want to look at in the next month or two or three or four, is to see if we can get a sense of how violence is either escalating or de-escalating as a result of this apparent agreement between CJNG and Los Chapitos. And I cannot stress enough how much I believe that this is not a Los Chapitos are now part of CJNG, and El Mencho's the president and Ivan's the vice president. I think it's far more strategic than that. What has been some of the reaction to this potential collaboration? A couple of quotes for you. We often see that the trafficking networks between Mexico and the United States include nationals from both countries, sometimes with dual citizenship, said Cecilia Farfan, head of the North American Observatory at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. This kind of criminal cooperation gives them an edge over governments which face obstacles with trying to coordinate efforts. Wholesale networks in the United States typically work with multiple suppliers in Mexico and can switch partners if necessary. This flexibility allows them to continue operating without being directly affected by Mexico's shifting criminal dynamics. A cocaine and methamphetamine distributor based in Utah told Inside Crime that the arrest of El Mayo had no impact on his business, even though factions of the Sinaloa cartel were among his main suppliers. He said, if Mayo's faction doesn't send product, no problem. Someone else always will. This is just business. Could not end that or end this discussion with a better quote. This is just business. Somebody will continue to supply. Okay, my friends, thank you for putting up my voice. It's great to be back on the air. I know this one was a little bit short, but I thought this is the best I could do under the circumstances. We'll be back next weekend with a full-length episode. A couple of people have sent some really interesting questions in the last couple of weeks. One in particular regarding the Cameron interrogation tapes that has me doing some additional thinking and stuff. So I love when people, write in and ask those questions. Keep throwing out your suggestions on topics. And please don't forget, if you're interested in the CIA's role in drug trafficking in the United States, particularly with respect to cocaine and fentanyl, please check out my book, Someone Had to Die and Someone Had to Lie. 2 books. And that's about it. Have a great, happy, and most importantly, safe 4th of July for those of you in the U.S. And I will talk to you next weekend on cartels, conspiracies, and Camarena. Thanks, everybody.